Well, today we have a special guest who never mind. I'll just use take one.
The first one worked.
First one worked.
In the old days when they had newspapers, you might not remember those. You're a little bit younger than I am.
What's a newspaper? So, once upon a time, when I was young and dumb, I'm still dumb, but now I'm old.
Can you imagine? Like suddenly because it's on the internet, I believe it. The internet is nothing but just a trough of garbage coming into your house. Why do you suddenly trust car sellers?
I wish I could remember 2.5 years later which video it was, but when you get to be my age, your memory starts to fail you. Coming up, when you have questions, chances are you're not alone, and lots of people could be asking the same thing. Today, we have a special guest who wants to try to answer some of your most frequently asked questions. It's a special edition of Ask the Expert on B2, and it all starts right now. Greetings and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Bridges, and this is B Squared. Show of hands. Who among us has never read one of those frequently asked questions pages on a website? Anybody? Just me? Okay. Those FAQs, as they're informally known, come about because people see the same questions over time and they want you to be able to get answers fast. And that's what we're here to do today. You've heard his name, you've seen his content, and today he's actually here. Please join me in welcoming attorney, author, and broadcaster Steve Lehto. Steve, thanks for being here.
It's good to be here, my friend. How are you?
Very good. Just enjoying the meteorological merry-go-round that is North Carolina weather.
There you go.
So Steve, as I'm intimated, brings us a list of the most common questions that he's seen over time. His show, Lehto's Law, has been running for 8 years, and he deals with a myriad of topics that overlap with law, hence its name, Lehto's Law. But I'm overstepping my bounds a little bit. Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel?
Well, I'm an attorney, and I worked in radio for a long time. I've also written a few books, and I've got a variety of jobs I like to keep busy. But primarily as an attorney, I specialize in lemon law. For 31 years, I've been representing people who bought defective cars. And so whenever someone's got a bad car and they get really upset, they start thinking, instead of calling a mechanic, I'm going to call an attorney. And I'm the guy they call. So they call my office if they think they have a case. They send me emails, or they watch my videos on YouTube. They comment on my videos, or they email me. And I've discovered one thing in 31 years of practicing in this field, and that is that I get the same questions over and over again. And it's primarily because people have a severe misunderstanding or profound understanding as to what the law actually is or does. Many people have heard the phrase lemon law, and it's a shorthand term for laws that protect consumers who bought defective products. But what does it apply to? What does it not apply to? And so when I get messages on my voicemail, I can see where they're going before they're even done, because people will call up and say, for instance, I bought a used car. I can finish that sentence for you. And it's defective. Can I sue that kind of thing. So I keep hearing these over and over again. And that was one of the things that inspired me to start doing my videos, which actually started as a podcast. Originally, I had a radio show called Lehto's Law, and I took call-in questions, and people would call me with these questions. And I'm like, weren't you listening last week? I covered this. And so the point is that a lot of people don't absorb the information until it happens to them. And I feel kind of like an ER doctor who's seeing gunshot victims all day long and wants to say, please stop getting shot. Please, because that's really it. And the point is that if you know this stuff before you go car shopping or RV shopping or boat shopping, it'll save you a lot of grief, because I have to tell a vast majority of the people who ask these questions, I cannot help you. But going forward, maybe it won't happen to you again. And that hurts. As an attorney, I'd love to sue somebody for you, but if I can't, then neither of us can have any fun.
I could say something about suing people for fun, but that's not all attorneys are like that. So tell us a little bit about Lehto's Law, your eponymous show.
Well, yeah, I started doing a podcast because I missed being on the radio, and that was about 9 years ago. And I was doing a podcast, and by the way, my show is still available as a podcast. I get 10,000 downloads a day of my podcast. I get people who say, Steve, you do videos? Because 10,000 is a lot for a podcast, but it's not that many for, like, say, I don't know, YouTube. And so I've been doing my audio podcast for about 6 months. And a friend of mine called me up and said, Steve, put it on YouTube. And I go, why? Who wants to watch a guy talk? And he goes, people do. And I'm like, you're kidding me. So I bought a GoPro camera for $100. I would put it on my desk right here, and I would film myself as I recorded my podcast. And I uploaded it, and the weirdest thing is that people started subscribing to that at a faster rate than they were listening to my audio on iTunes. And I'm like, that makes no sense until you realize the size of the YouTube audience. So I just started doing both. So every day I shoot 2 videos, and I upload 2 videos to YouTube and 2 podcasts to iTunes.
And I will tell you, and for benefit of my audience, you guys out there have heard me talk about Steve Lehto quite a bit. And I will tell you, Steve's show is one of only 2 that I never miss in real time if I can avoid it. The other one, of course, being DGR. One makes me think, the other one entertains me.
Which one am I?
That didn't quite come... I was going to say, that didn't quite come out right, but no. Let me rephrase that. One entertains me and makes me think. The other one just entertains me. And Steve Lehto's is the one that is 2 for 2. So,
okay, there you go. Thank you.
And I highly encourage anyone out there who is not subscribed to Steve Lehto's channel, wait until this show ends, but once this show is over, go and like and subscribe to his channel. And like I always say, tell him B Squared sent you. That way he has a reason to put up with all of my nonsense today.
Okay.
And Steve, as I understand it, you just started a second channel, so give us a quick primer on that if you would.
I have over 1,700 videos up on YouTube. They pile up real fast. And over the years, I've had videos that I took down for whatever reason. Among other things, if you've got too much stuff, I think it overwhelms people. Although 1,700 still is overwhelming. And I realized I've got about 500 videos that are no longer on my channel. And people will call me up and message me and say, Steve, what happened to the video you did like 7 years ago where you were talking about this? And I'm like, I forgot. I took it down, I guess. So I decided to make a second channel, which is called Steve Lehto Vault. And the second channel is where I park all the stuff that's not on my main channel. And some of it's old stuff. Some of it's stuff that doesn't quite fit on my channel. I've shot videos out mountain biking. I've shot videos out canoeing. I have a Dodge Viper, kind of like that one right there, but a real one, full-size one I can drive around in. I've shot videos in the Viper. And those videos do okay, but they don't do the same numbers as my regular videos. And so I kind of always was torn about putting them up, but I'm just dumping everything on this other channel, and people seem to be enjoying it. So.
And I'm curious, I remember there was a recent story that you did that you shot the video, but then before the video went out, there was an update. So you shot the update video and referenced your previous video that we hadn't seen. Is that video that we didn't see among the holdings on your second channel?
You know, I forgot which one that was. I don't even know. I do know that I put up a video about a month ago and took it down about an hour later because of a weird backlash I got. And I reposted that one on the second channel with an explanation saying, here's why I took that one down, because it wouldn't have been painfully obvious to people. But I've had some kind of strange things happen like that. And if you're on YouTube, you know this, so I'm preaching to the choir here, but you can put up a video, which means that you've got to have the story, produce it, upload it, have it go live. And in this time here, something might get updated. And I've had people respond and go, you didn't even mention the update that just happened 3 minutes ago. And I'm like, how could I? I shot the video 4 hours ago. So you can't make everyone happy. I've learned that. It's, wisdom of mine.
Sadly, it's true. And what you just described, I'm a communications major. That's what my degree is in. And we had discussions like that about print media back in the day, that the second you print something, it's out of date. And as sad as it is, unless you're doing things live, that is a challenge that we face. So definitely preaching to the choir on multiple levels.
Right.
So definitely go subscribe to Steve's primary channel and go subscribe to Steve Lehto Vault. I guarantee you will not regret it. Steve would appreciate it. And as the guy who's plugging his channel right now, I'd appreciate it. So
appreciate that.
Let's make everybody happy.
Of course.
Yes, sir. So what Steve has for us today is a top 10 list, specifically the top 10 questions that he sees most frequently in his practice. So what we're going to do today is just go through those, and Steve is going to give the answers that he wants you to have so that when you go out and do things in life, you'll be at least 10 questions worth better prepared than you otherwise would have been. And I don't want to steal Steve's thunder, so why don't you tell us what the first question is, and then I'll share the anecdote that I want to share.
The number one most common question I get, and I hear this every single day, people say, Steve, I bought a used car and it blew up right after I bought it. Can I sue the person I bought it from? Now, the question contains a couple subparts to its answer, but that's the beginning. You bought a used car from somebody and it blew up. Can you sue them? And sadly, the answer is almost always no. But I'll tell you why as soon as you explain to me what happened to you.
So, once upon a time, when I was young and dumb, I'm still dumb, but now I'm old, I let myself get drawn in by a bright red 1995 Camaro named her Zoe. First mistake, I got too attached too quickly. Zoe being the youngest Bartlett on the West Wing. Yes, I'm a nerd. But I bought this car from a dealership in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which was my second mistake. They say never do that. And I paid $5,000 for her, just sight unseen. Well, not sight unseen. I'd seen the car, obviously, and I'd test driven her. Seemed to be as good as a used car could be. So I gave them my money. They gave me paperwork with lots of places for me to sign, and I signed. And then, as step 4, I did what I should have done as step 2. I took her up to Raleigh so that my mechanic could give her a thorough looking over. This is what happened. I'm on I-40. 1 minute, I'm cruising at the lawful speed limit. I never, Vulcan's honor, I never exceed the safe speed limit. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And then the next, all of a sudden, I start losing speed, and I hear this bubbling sound. And I think, wonder what that could be. I found out a few minutes later when I lost all powered momentum. I pull off to the side, and I hear this loud hissing, which is all of my coolant just bubbling under the car onto I-40. So I called a tow truck, and $150 later, we pull up to my mechanic's service station, and a few hours later, he says, yeah, your engine is full of stop leak. What happened was it overheated. And I stupidly said, can you fix it? And he looked over the rims of his glasses kind of like this and said, it would cost more to try to fix this than it would be for you to buy the same car again. And on that day, I learned a very valuable and very expensive lesson. And the next time I bought a Camaro, affectionately known as Rami, you probably heard me talk about her before and seen photos of her, I was a lot more thorough. And I bought her in August of 2014, and she still sits outside covered in pollen to this day. So I did better this time.
Okay. Well, here's the deal. I am an attorney licensed to practice law in Michigan, so what I'm telling you is advice from an attorney, but there's no attorney-client relationship here. And quite frankly, the advice I'm giving you is focused on Michigan, but I'll specify these laws vary from state to state. But two things matter when you buy a used car. And the first one is, did you buy it from an individual or from a dealership? Because if you bought it from an individual, in most states, that sale is presumed to be as is, meaning you're buying the car with all faults. The second you hand them the money, they hand you the keys, that car is yours. You can get in the car, turn the key, and the engine can explode. The car can catch on fire and burn to the ground. Those ashes are yours. Get them off the property. And I know people who say, wait, that's not fair. Don't you get to go 100 yards? No, there's no 100-yard rule. That car is yours as is if you bought it from an individual. Now, dealerships might give warranties, except most states allow dealers to disclaim the implied warranty of merchantability, which means you're buying the car as is. Burns to the ground, get your ashes off the lot. And I know people who've told me, they said, Steve, I bought a brand new car, fired it up, as I was driving off the lot, it broke down. Well, that's too bad that happened to your car. And you're like, well, wait, no. Yes, it's your car. You bought it as is. So the first thing to know is if you're buying a used car, Are you buying it as is? Because as is literally means no implied warranty merchantability and no express warranties either, like 90 days or 3,000 miles or 336. You're buying it as it sits there. So you'd be well advised to have it inspected beforehand, test driven properly beforehand, and factoring into the price the fact that it could blow up in 30 seconds. So build that in. But the number one problem I hear is I bought a used car as is, but people don't ever say that. They say, I bought a used car and it blew up shortly thereafter. Can I sue? And the answer is, well, you can file a lawsuit, but it'd be frivolous. You will not win that lawsuit in most states.
And I will tell you that it's been more than 8 years since I made that purchase, but I distinctly remember in very large letters, in fact, on the purchase documents, it said, you are purchasing this car as is. And after I got the diagnosis from my mechanic, I actually called the dealership that I'd purchased it from, and I asked them the question too late, what warranty do you provide? And they said, well, if you bring it back, we'll be happy to take a look at it. And I said, that sure would be nice if I could still drive it, but it's an hour and a half away in Raleigh. So, oops. And the funny part is, I've actually been luckier with my second Camaro, and I bought her from an individual. And not just an individual, but he was an automotive engineer. And he said, if you have any problems with this car, let me be your first phone call. Because he had maintained it lovingly for the last 5 years.
And the thing you point out, the buyer's guide is extremely important because it's a federal law that a car dealership offering a car for sale has got to put a thing in the window or someplace visible in the car, a thing that says buyer's guide across the top. And the buyer's guide says right on it, this vehicle is either coming with a warranty or with no warranty as is. They're required to give you that document and check one of those boxes. In the states that don't allow as is, it reads a little differently. But when people call me from Michigan and say, I bought a used car from a dealer, and I say, well, did it come with a warranty? They say, I don't know. I said, well, did it come as is? They go, I don't know. And I said, pull out the buyer's guide. They go, what's that? I go, it's in the papers. You got to guarantee it. They pull it out and they go, oh, it says as is. And I say, yeah, that's what 99.9% of them say. So that car is yours, unfortunately. So there you go.
So lesson number 1 for today's episode for anyone who's keeping score is read documentation that you are given, including, some would say especially, the fine print.
Yes. And understand what it means to buy a car from a used car dealer as is.
Yes. And I would also say, know what questions to ask before you sign anything or before any money leaves your hand.
Yes. Now, number 2, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, but I get this phone call all the time. People say, Steve, by the way, a lot of people start their sentences to me by going, Steve, I bought a car certified pre-owned, CPO. I bought a CPO BMW because we like initials. And I drove it for 3 days and I went to pop the trunk and the trunk wouldn't open. The weirdest thing. So finally I jimmied the trunk open and the spare tire is missing. And I discovered something else going on. And if you read the CPO checklist, they check the trunk, they check the spare, they check all these things. But meanwhile, the car broke down on me. And I go, okay, so you bought a used car. No. I bought a CPO. Yes. And most states say there's 2 things a car can be, new or used. That is a binary proposition, my friends. It's one or the other. It ain't both and it ain't neither. It's got to be new or used. And just to let you know, as the timeline goes by, it starts out as new and goes to used. Never goes back. So once a car becomes used, making it certified pre-owned literally means they're certifying that it is in fact pre-owned. And I'm not kidding you. I've told so many people this because if you look at what CPO really is, they charge you a couple extra bucks and give you a slightly longer manufacturer's warranty. That's your entire remedy. So if what you're complaining about is covered by the warranty, your remedy is to take it in under warranty. But when somebody goes, I couldn't get the back door open, and they go, but shouldn't they have, look at the checklist. It's one of the things they checked back door. You can't sue them for missing things on that list in most states. All you can do is seek the remedy of the warranty. So certified pre-owned simply means slightly longer warranty, But it does not mean your car is new. It does not mean any other laws apply to you. It simply means slightly better warranty. That's it.
And there's a corollary to that within the electronics world. It's if you're shopping for something on Amazon and you see something that says, I think the exact phrasing is factory refreshed.
Yes.
What it means is they have taken something that was pre-owned, that was used, and they have restored it to their original specifications, and they're basically selling it to you as if it's new. They say that it's factory refreshed, but basically that means it's better than used. But having bought several monitors, as one example, that were factory refreshed, I can tell you that something that is factory refreshed is not like new. And so that's a good analogy for what you just described.
Mm-hmm. And the next one I hear, and I don't hear this quite as often, but the sheer terror in people's voices makes up for the lack of numerosity, as we say. People call me up and they go, Steve, I sold a used car to somebody, and now they're threatening to sue me. And I always say two things. One is, anybody can sue anybody. But even more so, people can threaten to sue. So when someone calls you up and goes, hey, you sold me that piece of junk 3 weeks ago, I'm going to sue you unless I get my money back. People say, what should I do? I go, number one, just stop taking their calls. If they're going to sue you, they're going to sue you. But remember at number one where I say if you bought a used car from an individual, you bought it as is? Good luck, because you just sold a car as is. And so you selling the car to them as is means they cannot sue you and win. Now, I've heard of people who don't want to get sued. They don't care if they get sued in the sense that they'd rather pay to make it go away. But I'm just here to tell you as a lawyer, if somebody sued you over a used car and the allegation simply was, I bought it and it broke down 3 months later, you'll win that lawsuit all day long. And you probably won't even need to bring an attorney. But the point is that if they threaten to sue you, literally stop taking their phone calls and see if they ever actually do. I've actually told people when they call me with this, I say, tell you what, call me back when they actually do sue you. And no one ever calls me back because they never actually do file the lawsuit.
That's something. And I can just imagine how many people have just said, yeah, get a lawyer. And just slam the phone down like you see in the movies.
Well, some people are scared and they're like, because people reverse it and they ask themselves like, hey, if I bought a car that blew up in 3 months, would I be upset? Could I get sued for that? But that's the one rare occasion where I go, you're actually okay. It's these other knuckleheads who are calling me who've got no case. Another common one I get, and this is a nuanced one, but someone will say, I bought a car from a dealer. Brand new or used, doesn't matter. I bought a car. And the salesman told me something. And it turns out that what he told me was either not true or an out-and-out lie. He lied about something. So, for instance, the salesman says, this car here, if it breaks down, bring it back. I'll take care of you. Well, does it come with a warranty? No, but if it breaks down, bring it back in. I'll take care of you. And the purchase agreements at most used car dealers are forms. They're boilerplate. It's like boilerplate was an element and they poured it into a mold. It's a big block of boilerplate. That's what a purchase agreement is at a car dealership. Buried amongst the boilerplate language is language that says words and promises made by the salesperson to the buyer are unenforceable unless reduced to writing here. And there's a big blank spot. There's nothing ever written there. And I've told people, if you ever go car shopping and the salesman says anything to you and you want to mess with him, go, hey, I got a question for you. Can you write that right here on the purchase agreement for me? I've actually seen them. Oh, we're not allowed to write there. Well, what's it doing there? Why is there a spot that says it's got to be here? Oh, we're not allowed. And I've seen it before where it says it's got to be reduced to writing, put here and countersigned by an agent of the dealership other than the salesperson. So literally, if the salesperson is speaking to you, all they're doing is wasting their breath because none of it counts. All that counts is what's written on that document, the purchase agreement that everyone signs. So all of the verbal statements are out the window. And I can tell you, I bought a used car once, and the guy told me, he goes, the car needs I said the car needs a new shock absorber in the back. He goes, oh, we'll get you a new one. I said, can you write that down for me? But they have a thing called a due bill or a we owe. And he filled one out and he gave it to me. And I always wondered, if I hadn't asked, would he have done that? You never know. What are you talking about? Salesman never said that.
And as you say that, I'm remembering every case I ever saw on Judge Judy where she said, the verbal contract is not worth the paper it's written on. And she'd hold up a piece of paper and say, only what appears between the four corners of this document is significant and carries weight.
And a lot of the contracts that I tell you about, which are just boilerplate, contain not just that section, but they'll also say other things such as that, it's got to be in this contract, and if it's not, it doesn't count, and if it is, it does count. But there's more than one place sometimes where it'll actually say, in essence, if it's not written here, it doesn't matter. And so literally, if the guy's talking, you just have to walk away from him because he's just making noise. He's wasting his breath talking. But they do that because they know they can get away with saying almost anything.
And something that I think you talked about on a recent video, since you mentioned contracts, something that you addressed that I think might bear summarizing here is what actually constitutes a contract, not just things written in crayon on a piece of cardboard, which I actually saw in an episode of Cops once. But what actually makes a contract a legally binding contract?
Well, I've got a book behind me called Contracts, and it's that thick. I pull it out and show it to you. This is actually an entire class in law school, but generally speaking, a contract is an exchange of promises and consideration, which create an agreement that a court will enforce. And so generally, it's got to be an agreement that you and I both agree upon, and we exchange something to where we both benefit, and we agree that that is our agreement. So contracts can be in writing. They can be handshakes, believe it or not. And sometimes states will have a limit saying a contract above a certain amount has to be in writing. But generally speaking, if you walk up to my house and say, need any work done, and I say, yeah, paint my porch, I'll flip you $50. If you paint the porch, I owe you $50. There's no written contract, but that is a contract. It's promissory estoppel as well. But for the 2 or 3 attorneys in the audience, I'll just throw that in there for you. But contracts, it's a nightmare, but it's really easy with automobiles because dealerships document everything. The bad news is they document everything in their favor and basically put the consumer out in the cold.
And that's what I was hoping you'd say. That goes back to make sure you read the documents, because however absurd their terms may be, if you sign it, you are locked into those terms.
Yeah, and they say that if you read a document and sign it, you're presumed to have read it and you've agreed with it, and therefore you signed it. And so I've seen people in court, I'm sure they pop up on Judge Judy or People's Court, saying, I didn't read that. Is that your signature? Yes. Too bad. That means you read it and you agreed to it. And most states, that is it. And so we've talked about this before. You go into a Verizon store to get your Android, and they spin the thing that you slide your card through around. They go, there's your contract. Click there. Well, if you scroll through it when they print it out, it's longer than a CVS receipt. But you just agreed to it. So I'm here to tell you, I've had 20 of these in a row, and I've never once read that. I just assume I've got to get it because I need a phone. I don't know. I'll also admit, and I do not have a copy of it anymore, I was in Paris back in about 2007, and I rented a car. I signed a rental agreement that was entirely in French. I have some understanding of basic French. I took like 1 semester in 7th grade. I don't understand adult contract French. And I actually asked the woman who spoke broken English, I said, is this similar to the contract in America? And she goes, oui. I go, okay, I was driving this car around all day long going, I don't know what's going to happen if I get in an accident. I might wind up in a French jail, a Bastille, I understand they call them.
And she wasn't saying we to mean yes. She was saying what you should be saying as you're driving their car.
Yes,
we.
Exactly. So one other thing I get, and this is actually true in all fields, not just cars. People will say, I bought something 2 days ago and it's defective. Can I really quick return it before 3 days? And a lot of people have this really faint notion in the back of their brain somewhere that you have 3 days to return something. And it comes from what's called the federal cooling off period that applies to some contracts. And in some states, it also applies to contracts that you sign in your own home. So in the old days, the guy comes by, knocks on your door, you go to look, and he's selling vacuum cleaners. He comes in the house, he's demonstrating a vacuum cleaner, you agree to buy one. If you sign that contract in your house, you have 3 days to cancel it in some states. However, it does not apply to sales at car dealerships, and it just simply doesn't apply to cars. And I mean, I've gotten people calling my office at Sunday in the evening, and they're panicking, and I hear the voicemail, and they go, I bought this car Friday, and I need to know how to count out the 3 days. Do I get the weekend or not? And I know what they're asking. They're thinking, is it Friday, Monday, Tuesday? Or is it Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Because how do they return a car on a Sunday? And I'm like, unfortunately, you don't get 3 days, so it's irrelevant. The 3-day thing does not apply to cars unless on the off chance a salesman came by your house, knocked on the door unannounced, said, do you want to buy a car? Which I've never heard of that happening.
I've heard of stranger things than that, but I've never heard of that. And it's something that I can't remember if we mentioned at the top of the episode or not, is everything that Steve is describing, you could cross out the word car and insert any consumer product, and what he's describing would still apply. So as you're listening to this, consider other scenarios that you've been in your life where you might have run into some of these problems with non-car products. And I guarantee you'll see a lot of relevance. That's my 2 cents anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You go to a garage sale and you buy a used computer and it blows up 2 days later. Number one, you don't have 3 days to return it. And number two, you bought it as is. So you're absolutely right. The only time that it makes a real difference is the laws that are car specific, like the Lemon Law, which shows how your ESP is working. Because the next question I get all the time is, they say, Steve, I bought a defective boat. I bought a defective tractor. I bought and they name something other than a car. So cars and trucks and SUVs, think of them as automobiles. They describe something else. I bought an RV, which we'll get to in a second. But I bought a non-car product. Can I sue under the Lemon Law? And the important thing to understand here is the Lemon Law itself in most states only applies to cars. There are some states that got lemon laws for RVs, very rare. And I've heard of 1 or 2 states that might have lemon laws for boats. Again, very unusual. Largely because other industries lobbied hard to keep their products out from lemon law coverage. But there are other laws that cover you, but they're not as clear as the lemon laws are. So if you bought a defective tractor, I've actually represented a guy who bought a $150,000 tractor and was defective. Filed a lawsuit, but not under the Lemon Law, is under a law called the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And some attorneys will handle those cases. A lot of attorneys who do Lemon Law will. I don't do them anymore, but I used to. And I've represented people with snowmobiles, personal watercraft, motorcycles, RVs, trailers, you name it. I've represented somebody on that. And at one point in my career, it became a challenge to find people with products I'd never represented before. A woman once called my office and said, I have a defective sewing machine. I'm like, come on down. I represented a woman who bought a defective, like $5,000 Swiss sewing machine just so I could say I did it. And I got the manufacturer to buy it back, but under the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act.
That does make one heck of a story, because most of the time when you think about the Swiss, anything of their manufacture is usually so to the second spot on.
Well, yes, and they make fine timepieces too. But the problem with this sewing machine is it had a computer interface. And this was at the early stages of things having that kind of computer control. And it was something wrong with the software. And when they bought it back, the manufacturer actually kind of admitted that. And so we've had problems with some of these. Not a problem, we'll buy it back from you. So since Steve mentioned RVs, I want to give an insider tip to my audience. Go to Steve's channel and search RVs, because the videos that he's done on RVs, I've seen them all. They are among the best, not just content-wise, but some of the best anecdotes and honestly some of the best reactions that you will ever see. So just, again, my tip as a longtime viewer, go subscribe to Steve Lehto's channel. Among the top 4 videos on my channel. I got 4 videos over 1 million views. Either number 1 or number 2 is don't buy an RV. We'll get to that in a second because I have one more thing I want to get to. People will call me up and say, Steve, I have a used car. It's defective. I want to go under the lemon law. The lemon law generally does not cover used cars. It generally covers brand new cars. So if you are the original owner of the car and it's defective within the first year or 2 of ownership, come on down. When someone says, I bought a car and it's, 2017 or something, if it's used, I can't help them. And if it's 2017, it's 5 years old already. Probably can't help them either. But the primary thing is that the lemon law itself only covers brand new cars and trucks and SUVs and so on. Now, number 8 on the list is I bought an RV. Now,
here we go.
People will call me up and say, Steve, I bought an RV. I don't need them to finish that sentence. I can usually finish it, except I don't know the defects they've got. But I've had people who bought an RV, drove it off the lot, driving it home, water pouring in through the windshield. I had a guy who bought an RV that cost 6 figures. If he drove it over 40 miles an hour, it'd catch on fire. Every time he caught it on fire, he'd pull it over the side of the road, extinguish the fire, and then take it to a dealership driving it below 40 miles an hour. And they would fix it, give it back to him, and he'd drive it back down the road and catch on fire again. And the fire was coming from a rear axle. And a rear axle, it had to do with the way the bearings were seated. And there was something defective back there that they would literally just replace the bearing with another bearing. That one would catch on fire too. After it caught on fire 4 or 5 times, we filed a lawsuit. I'm not making this up. In court, I had a judge literally just looking like this at the defense attorney going like, you think that's okay that he spent 6 figures on his RV and it catches on fire every time he drives it over 40. And the attorney, bless her, had to do what her client wants to. She goes, Your Honor, every time he brings it in, we fix it. And I just stand up and go, no, they don't. Why do you think it keeps catching on fire? So
exactly.
The weirdest part about the RV industry that no one understands, and by the way, I'm speaking to people who are not RV owners, before you buy one. When I say don't buy an RV, you can buy one. Just understand what you're getting into. Number 1, lemon laws don't cover them. Other laws do, but lemon law doesn't. But number 2, the RV manufacturers will tell you these are not built to automotive standards. It's basically like a poorly built apartment on a rolling chassis going down the highway. So many of them leak. I'd say all of them leak, but I haven't tested every single one. I've spoken to people who said the first time it rained, water was pouring through the ceiling. They take it back to the dealership, go, it leaks. Okay, leave it for 6 to 8 weeks. We'll look at it when we get a chance. And people will buy an RV in the spring in Michigan, hoping they can go RVing all summer long. They bring it back a week later because it leaks. And guess what? They go, oh, we'll get it back to you in October. And my right hand is purposely off screen. So you understand, you're not getting it back this season. You're getting it back next season. And I've had people tell me they bought the RV, brought it back a week later. The dealership had it all summer, gave it back to them in the fall. They took it out one last time and discovered it still did whatever they brought it back to the dealership for. And so they go, what should we do now? They go, take it to the factory. Take it to the factory. We can't even fix it. So then you drive down to Indiana, and it turns out there are factories down there that build these things that have entire lots set aside so people who bring their RVs back for service can stay in the RV while they're waiting for the service department to work. It's like, I don't want to upend my entire life because I wanted to take an RV up north, And so you got to understand what you're getting into. And that is that they often only have a 1-year warranty also. So I've had people before who got it back after the factory repair, took it on vacation, had trouble with it, and like, guess what? The warranty's over. They had the thing in their possession for like 2 weeks. It was repaired twice. It's not repaired, and now it leaks. So my advice to you, if you want to buy an RV, do a ton of research and buy one used from somebody who is handy. I've actually seen an owner's manual put up by an RV manufacturer that says, if you're a handy person, consider fixing things yourself. Because if you've got a screwdriver and a wrench and some duct tape and a caulking gun, you can do the same thing we're going to do when you bring it back in for repairs. And people get pissed off because they're like, I spent $100,000 on this thing and you want me to get up to the caulking gun? It's like, well, what do you think we're going to do with it? But if you do the research and find somebody who's got a good one and they're selling it, because trust me, right now, you can find used ones out there, dime a dozen, because a lot of people get so angry that they sell them and they sell them at a loss. So just find out what you're getting yourself into, but understand they are not built to automotive standards and the Lemon Law doesn't cover them. And I don't even handle RV cases anymore. I used to. And right now in Michigan, I don't know of any attorneys who handle them. I know a guy in Ohio who handles them. And people call my office and go, well, do you at least know something? I'm like, no, not unless you're in Ohio. And that's because it's just so slanted against the consumer in this field. And they fight every single one of them. They don't care how bad it is. The example I gave where my client drove it off the lot on the way home and water started pouring in through the windshield. We discovered later that the RV had been damaged on the lot at a very, very large dealership here in Michigan. And where the windshield frame was, something had fallen and smashed it right in the corner and broke the windshield out. So they put a new windshield in and they straightened out the top of the frame as best they could, but you know. And then they basically stuck like a whole tube of caulking compound in there and it didn't quite take. And my clients were an elderly couple who were, I believe, in their 70s or 80s. And the woman, the wife, was this prototypical little gray-haired woman that is your grandmother. I don't care if you've already got one. She's your grandmother. She's got cookies nearby. I guarantee it. And her husband, the World War II veteran in the wheelchair with the oxygen tank, they were planning on using that in their golden years traveling around the state of Michigan. And I actually called up the manufacturer and said, I've got a case here. This thing was damaged pre-delivery. You got to buy it back. They go, no, we'll see you in court. And the funny thing is they assigned it to an attorney I've dealt with before. I know the guy really well. And we got to the deposition. They're going to depose my clients to get their story. And I go, Charlie, did you ask your clients or anybody about my clients? He goes, no, why? And I go, don't worry, you'll see. And grandma comes in pushing grandpa, World War II veteran in the wheelchair with the oxygen tank. I'm not making this up. My friend looks at me and goes, Steve, let's go in the hallway. And that's one of the rare occasions where I got them to buy one back. And it was only because we would have wheeled him in front of a jury and let him tell the story about how they're treating him. And the RV manufacturers generally don't mind going in front of a jury and going, hey, they bought this vehicle and they expect it to be perfect? What are these people, perfectionists? But they ain't going to do that, the World War II veteran in a wheelchair. So they bought it back. But even so, I hear horror stories and go, I'm really sorry I can't help you because they're just not worth dealing with from my perspective.
And I think one of the most salient points you've ever made in one of your RV videos was when you invest in an RV, whether you're buying it or you're renting it, you have to take into account that you could have the worst of vehicular problems, but you could also have the worst of house problems because technically, like you said earlier, it's a hybrid of the two. So yeah, you get the best of both worlds. You have a living space that's portable, but at the same time, you have maintenance times two.
Yeah, and think about this. Take a poorly built home and shake it, and after a while, stuff starts falling apart. And, I've walked through RVs before, and some of the higher end ones are better built. But generally speaking, I've watched these things being built. You can find videos on YouTube of them assembling these things. They build them real fast. And after a while, they will just start getting loose and stuff. So, yeah, you could have, the fun thing about a car case with Lemon Law is my engine, my transmission, whatever. I had people calling me in the RV, my toilet doesn't flush. And I'm like, oh, God, I got to deal with plumbing issues. So that's it for RVs. As you can see, I get all fired up about that. Now, one other question. I get two questions here. And one of these questions, though, ties back into something we talked about earlier. And that is, Michigan, for instance, does not have vehicle inspections. You can buy a car, title it, register, do all that stuff, and drive it down the road, and it can be a death trap. And unless a police officer can visually see something that's wrong with your car, and give you an equipment ticket, it doesn't matter. Cars can have rust holes in the frame. You can see through to the ground like Fred Flintstone's car. You can have cracked glass. It doesn't matter. Drive it. Michigan doesn't care. Other states, however, have vehicle inspections. I've had people tell me that they bought a car in Michigan, drove it back to their state, and it didn't pass an inspection. And I go, well, I guess you should have thought of that before you bought the car, right? And they go, well, no, it won't pass an inspection. And I say, so what? And they go, wait, Michigan doesn't have inspections? I go, no. Why? And in some states, if you buy a car, it has to pass an inspection if you bought it in that state. So I know if you go into a car dealer in New York, for instance, the state of New York, I believe they've got vehicle inspections. And if you buy a car, it's got to pass an inspection. So that does bring it up a little bit to a threshold that you know it'll pass an inspection, at least for one day. And so don't assume that when you're in a state that requires inspections, when you buy a car from another state, that it'll pass an inspection in your state. Because unless they put that in writing, which we know they won't do, you're going to be on your own. And I mean, I had a guy screaming at me one day, a couple of years ago. And he said, Steve, I bought this vehicle and it won't pass an inspection. I'm like, okay. And I mean, he's like, what do you mean, okay? I'm like, what kind of inspection are you talking about? And he goes, a vehicle inspection by the state. I go, what state? He goes, New York. I go, well, there's your problem. We don't have inspections in Michigan. And he's like, you're kidding me. And I'm like, no, you need to get out more often. And the final thing, this is actually number 10 for those of you counting along at home. People will call me up and say, Steve, I bought a car off the internet. I bought a car in California. I live in Michigan. 35 color photographs on the internet look great. I wire them the money. They ship me the car. Car's unloaded. It's a piece of junk. What do I do now? Now, here's the interesting thing. I've represented people on cases like that, but only on the rare occasions where the photographs were of a different car and we could prove it. And they showed photographs that didn't show damage that was clearly there that they concealed. But the point is that in real life, in the old days when they had newspapers, you might not remember those. You're a little bit younger than I am.
What's a newspaper?
In the old days, they had classified ads in the back. And it would actually say things like, 1969 Dodge Charger 383, automatic transmission, runs great with a phone number. You wouldn't call that phone number and go, describe it to me. Tell you what, give me your address. I'll mail you a check. You ship me the car. No. You'd go there in person, walk around it, kick the tires, slam the doors, take it for a test drive, and then decide if you're going to buy it. Why wouldn't you do that now? Just because you can buy cars in other states as easily as you can buy them here, you should still spend the care investigating that car as you would if it was here. Can you imagine? Like suddenly because it's on the internet, I believe it. The internet is nothing but just a trough of garbage coming into your house. Why do you suddenly trust car sellers? You don't trust them in real life. Why would you trust them on the internet? And I've spoken to so many people who got ripped off buying cars on the internet. And the primary reason is the vehicle was never inspected by anybody that they knew. Now, I've spoken to people who successfully have bought cars off the internet. What happens is they're buying a car in another state. They get someone they trust to look at the car, inspect the car, test drive the car, and they say, I'll take it. Yeah, it's an extra expense, but do you really want to be the person who just offloaded the piece of junk car in front of your house? And the question now is, you bought the car in Michigan. Do you have to sue them in California? There's all kinds of other problems also. And so I know people who say, but Steve, some of the internet sites out there, like eBay, have these programs where they say, well, they'll protect you if you wind up getting stuck with something like this. Go read the exclusions of what they actually do cover and what they don't cover. I've had people call me before and say, Steve, I bought a car and they never sent me the title. And one of those protection plans will not cover it because they say it's not a covered event. They go, well, you got the car. Car's no good without the title. Well, that's between you and the seller. Oh, thank you. So you got to be just as vigilant buying a car off the internet as you would be in person.
And as an example of how that principle translates to other types of products, let me just start by blanket saying buying something off the internet sight unseen is a path to sadness. And once while I was working overseas, I bought a dual touchscreen Acer Iconia laptop just because it was cool. It was something that sounded really cool, and I had to have it because I'm a gadget nerd. And if you can tell by the room behind me, I collect technology, both useful and esoteric. Well, this was of the esoteric variety. And the problem was Acer had stopped manufacturing them by the time I came across this concept. So when I ordered it, it was from a private seller who had had it since he'd bought it new during Acer's production run, which had ended several years before. So you can probably already see where this is going. So they shipped it and I got this thing, and two problems immediately became apparent. The battery technically would hold a charge, but it maxed out at 12%. So technically, I couldn't get them for not saying the battery didn't work. The other problem was after 3 days of light use, mind you, the lower touchscreen developed a ghost touch. If you've ever used a touchscreen, you know what I'm talking about. It developed one of those, and I still technically had something that had two displays. And if I wanted to use it with a traditional mouse, I could. But the second I enabled the lower touchscreen, I'd have all these context menus opening, all the different functions of the built-in software trying to activate. I mean, I was going like this. It's like, how could they do this to me? And then, like a very unintelligent person, I bought another one about 6 months later, and it developed. That one had a fully functional battery, I'm happy to say, but it developed the same ghost touch after about a month. So I'm guessing it's just a fault of that production line. So I don't necessarily hold the seller responsible, but when it happened the second time, that's when I did my research, #critical_research_fail. And it turns out that when that type of ghost touch appears, there are ways to mitigate it temporarily. And I'm thinking, Steve, you already know what I'm thinking. They must have implemented some of those fixes right before they shipped them to me.
Yeah. And by the way, the concept of getting something inspected before you buy it doesn't just apply to a remote purchase. I've spoken to a lot of people who said, Steve, I bought a used car. I drove it home. Next day, I took it to my mechanic. It sounds like something you told me about. And then I discovered a problem with it. My mechanic says this car is unsafe to drive. He won't even let me drive it. He said, ooh, you got ripped off. And I say, well, let me get this straight. You bought it, then you had it inspected? Guess what? It's an order of operations problem. You should get it inspected, then buy it. And people go, yeah, but that's a waste of money. And I go, guess what? I bet now you'd spent that money, right? And it's unfortunate because people don't want to get the inspection because they know it's going to cost them money. And people always are optimistic when they're buying a car. They hope it works out. They wish it would work out, but that doesn't make it work out. And that's the problem.
So lesson learned, unlike mathematics, the steps in car buying are not commutative.
Exactly. Yes, this is not a multiplication problem. It's an operations problem.
And my 6th grade math teacher, who swore I would never learn something like order of operations, would be very proud of me for using that statement. So, Miss Royal, there you go.
There you go. Perfect. So that is the top 10 things that people complain to me about involving cars. And like I said, I can sometimes help people when they call me, but a lot of this stuff, in these questions in particular, it's better if you learn it, take it to heart, and you can avoid getting ripped off in the first place. Think of it as preventive medicine for your wallet.
And that's a good way to look at it. And as a former boss of mine was fond of saying, you have no better ally than to be informed. And that's our goal today, to impart the solutions to common problems or answers to common questions so that when you go out and try to do life, you avoid certain potholes. So that's, and I'm very glad we did it. And I'm really glad we did it on a personal level because it's been about the best conversation I've had all week. And I have some conversations, as you can imagine. So something that I kind of wanted Steve to comment on, is if you watch Lehto's Law, one thing that you'll see very quickly is that Steve's content is user sourced. In other words, people email him stuff. And I don't want to steal your thunder on this, Steve, but I am recalling certain comments that you've made over the years that I've been watching about certain things that you've been sent that were easy to work with and certain things that were not easy to work with. So, to anyone who might want to send you something, what advice would you offer?
Literally, I think you'd have to go back several hundred videos of mine to find one where I actually said, this is an idea I came up with on my own. I just wanted to talk about. I tell people, if you've got an idea for a story, you can email me, message me through Facebook, whatever you want to do, get me a message, and I will look at it. And I often go through my inbox and I see all of a sudden, boom, 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 in the subject lines, a bunch of stories popping up. And I get several hundred emails a day, at least. And I go through them looking for story ideas. And if it caught someone else's attention to where they send it to me, quite often people have got a very good idea of what I'm looking for. The one thing I will not do is I will not watch video links, because people will send me a video. Go, Steve, check out this video. And I say, when was the last time you saw me show a video inside my video? I've never done that. So I say, if you've got a story idea with a link, I can go read the story, send that. And it does help if you put in the subject line, instead of story idea or check this out, if you put a word or two that were keywords, like there was a hot story last week about the guy who's been sued because someone else was driving his car during an oil change and killed their coworker. And now the coworker's family is suing the owner of the vehicle who wasn't driving it. I got probably a couple hundred emails eventually from people saying, Jeep oil story or Jeep murder Michigan, and I'd see the word Jeep oil and Michigan, and people are saying, Steve, it happened in Michigan. It's right up your alley. And so the reason I like that is I like to credit everyone who sends me a story. So at the end of every video, I'll often say, here are the people who sent it to me, and boom, 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 and I'll rattle them off. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3, but sometimes it's like 35 or 40. And I like the idea, though, because I can tell by looking at the frequency of suggestions about a topic people want to hear about. And quite often, the stories that are most suggested are the videos that do really, really well. And so I like that. So I tell people, send me a message with a link, not a video, and put something in the description line so that later, when I go back looking for all the people who sent me that concept, I can go, oh, this person, and write them all down. I've had some people get mad at me. They go, Steve, I sent you a video and you didn't thank me. And I'm like, I sent you a link and you didn't thank. I go and look, I can't even find their email. And then I realize that they put like, here's one in the subject line. And it's like, well, of course I missed that. So I try.
And I've heard you describe several times that people send you emails. Your description is like the perfect email that you get, and that I'm not going to I'll let you describe it, but I remember, if I remember right, you said something like, when I mention that I get an email like this, I'll get a couple of dozen more from people trying to do the same thing. So what would you say is the perfect email?
Well, the perfect email is when somebody comes up with a question that is so simple, yet you immediately understand what the issue is and why it's important and interesting to people. And so, for instance, one guy asked, he said, Steve, if I own a piece of property, can surveyors trespass on my property while conducting a survey? Can they do that without my permission? And that's a great question, because many states have got a law specifically saying they can, but then it explains what they've got to do to make it legal. So I went through this because anybody who owns a piece of property is curious about that. I also had a guy ask recently, he said, we've all seen that, do you swear to tell the truth, whole truth? What if I said no? I don't want to be sworn in. So I explained.
That was a terrific video.
Yeah, I explained, the judge will hold you in contempt. But other than that, you're fine. But many of these things have got better explanations underneath them and some background I can go into. Somebody asked, and I can't remember if this was a simple question or not, but about the issue about airplanes flying through your airspace. Oh, it came up with a 4-corner crossing. And I wound up doing a video about whether or not you own the airspace over your property. And the number of people who are wrong and saying, you don't own that, the FAA owns it. And I'm an attorney. I'm speaking of the legal definition of ownership. You own that airspace, no question. The FAA regulates the airspace, and they might regulate it to the point where you can't use it, but you still own it. And I've had people, it's an insane number of people telling me I'm wrong on that. I've actually gotten a note from somebody at the FAA who said, Steve, you're right. I just can't believe you're trying to explain this to people. So I've had lawyers contact me. It's funny. Whenever I look through the comments below a video and I'm getting negative comments, they're never from attorneys. They're never from attorneys. It's non-lawyers telling me I don't know the law. And one just for those of you who've made it this far into the video, I'm going to tell you a little secret. And I've mentioned this once or twice before. I specialize in lemon law. I've been practicing lemon law for 31 years. So people go, what does he know? He's just a lemon law lawyer. And I've actually asked somebody and said, well, what kind of lawyer are you? Well, I'm not a lawyer. So wait, you know more than me because I'm just a lemon law lawyer? They go, well, you don't know anything about criminal law. Really? You understand that to get through law school, you take criminal law classes. To pass the bar, you got to understand criminal law. And I was a public defender before I was specializing entirely in lemon law. I think I know a little bit about criminal law. Well, you never mentioned that. Well, why would you assume I'm ignorant on something I'm talking about? By the way, I'm right, you're wrong. So,
and may I add behind that, if you look behind Steve, the blue books behind him is, as best I recall, Steve, is the Michigan Criminal Code. Is that right?
It's the Michigan compiled laws, but it contains the criminal code. Yes. The blue books behind me.
Yeah. And you see how many of those blue books there are?
Yes.
I've seen Steve reference things in many of those books. Like he'll point to one and say, it's in that book right there. And he'll recite it from memory. That I recall, I don't think I've ever seen you actually have to go and pull one of those books off the shelf.
Well, so yeah, most of the laws I cite are ones I've dealt with so often. So, like the law on conversion is MCL 600-2919A, or the lemon law is MCL 257-1401 et sec, that kind of thing. But I mean, if you got the books, you don't need to have that stuff memorized. But it's just funny because I'll get people who say, well, he's just a lemon law lawyer. I'm like, okay.
Steve Lehto is the best lemon law lawyer that I've talked to over Riverside FM today. So that should tell you something.
That's a stretch.
That's a stretch. It's true. It's like when I made an entire bag of lemon Oreos disappear. The way I described it is I said, I did it in less than a week. The actual truth is I did it in less than 24 hours, but, I say a week.
There you go.
I feel better about myself.
Technically, it's true.
Technically, it's true. So now this has been a terrific and informative outing. So, Steve, I know you're tired of hearing me say it, but thank you very much for coming and sharing with us.
Well, I had a great time, and just so you know, I do get people from time to time who ask me if I can come on their show or do something with them. And I really admire what you're doing because you reached out to me a while back and you said, hey, I'm launching a channel and I'm planning on putting up videos on YouTube. And I want to send you some stuff. Will you look at it for me from time to time? And then you also asked if you could use a clip of something of mine. And I've had people use my stuff without asking. And legally, you might be able to do that. I don't know, fair use or something. But you were courteous enough to ask me. And I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. How rare is that? Someone's actually asking me. And so I really appreciated that. But, the thing is, there's a lot of people making videos on YouTube. And anybody can make a video on YouTube. It ain't that hard to do. But it looked to me like you were doing it the right way. And, you've got some personality. You've got some content to talk about. So I salute you. I support you. And I will do my best to drive people over here. And we'll see how that works out for you.
I appreciate it. I know you're tired of hearing me say it, but I sincerely appreciate that. And to those, and here's something interesting for longtime viewers. So if Steve looks familiar, which he should, because you've seen his likeness a couple of times, but if you've watched since the pilot, what Steve is referring to is the first time I reached out to him, it was when I needed a background image for the bullet list of creators that I wanted to give shout outs to all the way back in the pilot, of which Steve was one, actually. I actually needed a background image, and like at the time that I was trying to come up with a visual, Steve had just put a video out literally that day where he said something and laughed, and I thought that would make a good visual, someone enjoying what they're doing. So I reached out to him, and he said, "Go ahead and do it," and I did, and it's to this day I'm still grateful to you for blessing off on that, Steve. And
well, I appreciate I appreciate that, and funny you mentioned backgrounds, because for the few people who've not seen my channel but have seen yours, the stuff behind me, there's actually stories behind almost all of it. It would take too long to explain right now. I've done videos where I explain all of it, but I tell people it looks kind of like a bomb went off in a junkyard. But it all makes sense. I wrote a book about that car. I wrote a book about that car. I wrote a book about that car, and I own one of those cars. And so, that kind of thing. There's a story behind every single thing on the set. So it does tell a story. It just takes a little while to figure it all out.
And having heard some of those stories, Steve has a very rich background, and there are legitimately interesting stories behind each of the pieces of set dressing that he's described. So if you happen across one of those videos on his channel, it's worth the watch just for that. Because again, rich stories told in a style that is informative and entertaining as only Steve Lehto can do it.
Well, I appreciate that, my friend.
Yes, sir. So, anything else you want to share?
That's all I got. Is that
Questions
not enough for you?
Below. We'll talk to you later.
My videos are 12 minutes long, okay? How long have we been here? I'm just kidding.
1 hour, 6 minutes, 33 seconds. and all of it fun and entertaining.
The funny part is, if I did a video where I actually said I'm going to do a video on the top 10 things that people call my office about, I would have knocked it out in 15 minutes, but it would have seemed rushed. Really, really rushed. So that's the difference here.
Well, and like I said, it's been a lot of fun, and I have always appreciated that you bring a certain humor to everything that you describe. I've said it before, when I came across, so here's a little bit of background for my audience. So when I came across Steve's channel for the first time, it was a few months into the pandemic, and I was just watching things on YouTube while I was working from home, and I came across his channel. I wish I could remember 2.5 years later which video it was, but when you get to be my age, your memory starts to fail you. But I saw it, and I'm like, this is an attorney who's sharing commentary on cases. Well, I'll give it a shot anyway. But what I discovered was that from pretty much the very first frame of the very first video, Steve too has a personality. He has an informed perspective, but he's able to present even the most mundane scenarios in an engaging and entertaining way. So I don't want to say infotainment, because that term just has a bad context.
Right.
But his content is highly entertaining. And like I said, it's one of only 2 Tubecasts that I never miss in real time if I can avoid it. So if someone like me can get enjoyment out of it, think of how much enjoyment everybody else in the audience can get. So I repeat my call. Go and like and subscribe to Steve's channel and his secondary channel too, his new channel too. And you will not regret it. And he does have a lot of videos, but do an archive dive. It is worth it.
The scary part is how many people have actually told me, Steve, I've watched every one. I'm like, how is that mathematically possible? And I had somebody tell me just recently, they go, I've watched all 1,700 of them. And they go, and I noticed some were missing. Do you still have those? And I'm like, okay, I'll start the second channel. So
I will admit, there is one video of yours that I've watched more times than any other. And that's the story that you did on the red light cameras in Greenville being declared unconstitutional.
Really?
And the reason is I sent you, and the reason is I'm the one who sent you that story.
Oh, okay. That's funny, because there's another one I get where people tell me they've seen it more than once. And I tell the story, and by the way, it's completely true, but I tell a story about how I used to live in a house and I had a neighbor behind me, and between us was nothing but lawn. And my neighbor was convinced he owned 6 feet onto my property. And I knew where the property line was. It was 6 feet the other way. He was wrong. And this guy mowed his lawn 3 days a week. The guy had nothing better to do but mow his lawn and mow my lawn. And he'd come out and mow this strip of lawn. And so just to annoy him, I'd go and mow where I knew the property line was. He'd come out and scream and yell at me, "What are you doing mowing my lawn?" I'm like, "Dude, this is my lawn. Get away from me." And after he did that, you've seen the video, haven't you?
Yes, I have. That's why I'm laughing.
I owned an Army truck at the time, an M35 deuce and a half, 2.5 ton military vehicle, huge truck. And I rattle canned it myself into 4-color camo. And it looked good. I have pictures of this truck. I sold it later for more than I bought it for, even though I painted it with spray cans. And I also had recently done some yard work, and I had these big, long metal spikes that you use to hold down the plastic lining around like the edge of a garden. And so one day I'm sitting in my living room, and I could sit in the couch and watch the TV and look out onto my backyard. And I see Charlie out there, and that's his name. He doesn't watch my videos, I'm sure. He's mowing the lawn, and all of a sudden his lawnmower goes thunk and comes to a screeching halt. And I see him, and he pulls his lawnmower back, and he reaches down, and he pulls this big metal spike up out of the ground that's painted green. And he looks at it, he looks at my house, and he throws it at my house. And then he fires the lawnmower back up and mows his lawn. And so it became kind of entertainment for me to sit on my couch and watch him mow my lawn and wonder if he's going to hit any more spikes. And darned if he didn't hit 6 or 7 more. And it was the weirdest thing. He wouldn't hit one every time. They were apparently in different places. And the guy was not bright enough to realize you throw them into your own yard so that they don't show back up again. But he was on my property, running into hazards that were on my property. He couldn't complain about it. And here's one thing that's happened since that video went up. I moved. I don't own that house anymore. He still lives there. And I know who owns the house that I used to own. And the first thing they did when they moved in, they apparently got in a fight with Charlie, and there was a row of bushes down the line. They chopped them down and they put in a fence. And so apparently they had enough of his nonsense. And I guarantee you, if you went and found Charlie today and said, "What do you think of that guy who owned the property while those spikes were popping out of the ground?" He'd probably go, "Oh, that guy was a jackass," referring to me. But who do you like better now? Me or the guy who put up a fence? And the guy put up a monster fence right on the line where I said it was. So once in a while, it's entertaining all the way through.
And there's a poignant lesson there. Yeah, everybody out there, if you happen to live next to Steve Lehto, make sure you stay on his good side.
Well, the weird thing is, there was no question. There was an obvious line. And he's going, "No, I own over here." It's just dude. By the way, no one was hurt. Nobody got hurt. It was just, I think it frustrated him because he's one of these guys. He mowed his lawn 3 days a week. He's back in the garage, like polishing his lawnmower and talking to it. So he's a little bit off.
All the same, I'm going to throw in a disclaimer. No neighbors were harmed in the making of that anecdote.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I never said I did anything. I just sat and watched. So
the distinction is duly noted.
Yes.
Well, all right, sir. I think that's going to do it for us today. But thanks to everybody for watching. And of course, thanks Steve Lehto for being here today. Welcome back anytime. And I hope you will come back for another appearance one of these days.
Oh, yeah.
I promise I will always ask you before I use any of your content. if that's the dowry I have to add.
Well, no, I just thought it was a nice touch. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. No, I've been on the far end of that where people have purloined my content, so I'm the last person who would ever do that to someone else. But thank you for always letting me use your content. And like I said, thank you very much for being here today and for sharing everything with us. Very, very productive conversation. And as always, I appreciate the humor that you bring to it as well.
Anytime, you're welcome.
Yes, sir. For more from Steve Lehto, make sure to like and subscribe to his channel. Search Steve Lehto. The name of his show is Lehto's Law. As I said before, you like and subscribe, You will not regret it. Steve would appreciate it, and as the guy who's giving him plugs, I'd appreciate it too. Remember, tell him B Squared sent you so he has a reason to be glad he put up with all my nonsense today. As always, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is Brandon Bridges reminding you the best way to be is B Squared. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Brendan is a fool. La 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 la.